Okay. A very warm welcome to everyone. We are going to commence with the Ideas Forum 5 on enabling the LiFE economy. Despite significant growth and demand, the LiFE economy faces significant barriers within the constraints of current economic systems. In recent years, a number of countries, including virtually all G20 members, have advanced policy and regulatory reforms to strengthen the enabling ecosystem for the LiFE economy. Beyond actions by governments, innovations in sustainable finance, impact assessment, participatory governance, and other areas have also significantly contributed to enabling the LiFE economy. Thus, it is extremely essential to deliberate on these issues. So, to moderate this session, we have with us Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Director ISID and former DG RIS. So I welcome you and I request you to begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is a very important discussion that we are going to have this early morning, and a number of people are still finding their way to this hall. But while they find their way to the hall, let us get started, because time is very precious. We have such a big cast of very eminent speakers for this session, so I don't want to take any more of your time for waiting for some missing people. They will join. So, yesterday and the day before, we got started on discussing the various concepts and the criticality of the LiFE economy for sustainable development, for getting where we want to go. And the number of things were discussed throughout the day, including in the action labs. So many parallel sessions. But what is coming out is that we need to do something to power this movement towards LiFE economy and strengthen the ecosystem for taking it forward. So that is the discussion we are going to have in this session today. So what are the key barriers, key policy measures that we take at the level of governments and at the level of civil society and other players and international cooperation? And we should come. Yes. So we have a full panel with us. Just start with later. Yeah. And governments have taken a lot of initiatives, regulatory measures also. For instance, the bans which have been imposed by many governments of the region and beyond on single-use plastics. This is one important measure which has been adopted in many countries, and which will prove to be very fruitful. But many other policy measures are needed, and we need to also look at how we can foster innovations in creating new solutions, more effective solutions for promoting and fostering LiFE economy, the innovations also in sustainable finance, then impact assessment, participatory government, and all of these different enablers. So as I said in the beginning, we have a very eminent panel to debate on and provide inputs on these very important issues. And so without any further ado, I want to turn to key speakers for this morning. And I would pose one or two questions to each one of them in the interest of time, and would request them, invite them to respond to those questions to get started in 5-6 minutes, if that is possible. And I would begin with Professor Dr. Stefan Klingebell of the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, IDOS. It goes by the shorter acronym IDOS, where he is chair of a research program on international and transnational cooperation. And so, Stefan, I would like to ask you to elaborate on the LiFE as a development paradigm, because we need to begin with a good understanding of what it is about, what we are talking about, and in a broader geopolitical context, you can talk. That would be very helpful. So, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, Dr. Kumar. And I'm really glad to be here on this seminar and panel. Before I make small remarks, one pre-remark, great that RS is hosting this important global summit on LiFE. I'm a bit concerned about some of those panels that the gender balance is a main feature, and it's not just to bring a woman here to this, but I know that in this room, outside of the room, there are many smart women with a good understanding of the topic. Yeah. Just a small advice, maybe for next time. Sorry. And I have 6 quick points. So my first point is India is good in presenting development paradigms. LiFE as a development paradigm, I think it's not just by chance that India is presenting it in 23 because of the G20 summit, or because of the G20 summit, but also because of the broader context. I will come back to this in a moment. I, like probably many of you, remember the Bhopal meeting in January this year. I found it really exciting that LiFE as a development paradigm is different from other development paradigms, from Western development paradigms, etc. And I just also want to mention that I thinking about India is really good in framing those topics. Yeah, I mean, non-alignment movement, Bandung 1955. For me, it's also a development paradigm, and India was a co-organizer of this. So this is as a starting point. My second point, and I love to, as an academic, similar to you, to look at definitions. What is a paradigm? And in this regard, I'm just using some definitions which are presented in academic literature. So paradigms are a system of thought that provide the tools and the context for approaching and analyzing our experiences and the world around us. So paradigms shape whether and how problems are identified, which information is seen as relevant, and who counts as an expert, and which tools are chosen to address those given situations. And in a nutshell, I would say this is about norm making and not norm taking. Yeah. So you create a norm. You are saying this is our standard. This is our gold standard. This is what we want to achieve. And so in this regard, it's about really the fundamental things. My next point is I also look at development paradigms in a context of geopolitical struggles over thoughts on development. And just again, in a nutshell, I think we are coming from a situation, Cold War, where we had this kind of competition between the West, United States, and the West as such, and the East, Soviet Union. So geopolitical thoughts were used as a tool in this regard. We had a period of, I would call it, depolitization of development thinking. Think about the Millennium Development Goals approved in 2000 and Agenda 2030 and its SDGs approved in 2015. This is a bit, let's take out the geopolitical dimension. And what we are experiencing over the last couple of years is a new politicization of development paradigms. And this new politicization is very much related to the rise of China. I mean, I'm not telling you something what is totally new. China, looking at China, I mean, it's typically much more than just few categories, but we have those 4 main development initiatives, so Belt and Road initiatives from 2013. We have the Global Development Initiative by President Xi, launched at the UN General Assembly in 21, which is, it's a pure narrative. I mean, Belt and Road, it's about infrastructure. And infrastructure is also a narrative, at least an implicit narrative. Then we have the Global Development Initiative. Without infrastructure projects, it's about a narrative how China is supporting the Agenda 2030. Then we have in 22 the Global Security Initiative, which is also in place to secure BRI investments, by the way. And the Global Security Initiative in consultation with the BRICS group, that's also quite interesting. And in March this year, China was launching the Global Civilization Initiative, which is about some fundamental principles, including non-interference, etc. Those initiatives, and it goes beyond those four formal documents, is something where Western actors, and I think not only Western actors, but also other Southern actors, not to mention any specific country, pay a lot of attention to. And this is leading to a situation where we have a number of responses to provide also alternatives to this kind of Chinese approach, which is quite dominant in many parts of the world. I mean, I'm not talking about China in the world and China in Africa, etc., but this is a very influential development paradigm. So what we saw over the last couple of years, those initiatives Build Back Better, which is now called Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment by the United States. We have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, also launched by United States with a number of partner countries, including India. We have the Global Gateway Initiative launched by the European Union in December 22, where we had a big meeting, the Global Gateway Forum, just a couple of weeks ago. What I also find quite interesting, we have some indications for mixed alliances in this regard. IMEC was signed at the sidelines of the G20 summit here in India in August by Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, which is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. What is quite interesting, this is not a Southern or Northern alliance, but it's India, it's United States, it's United Arab Emirates, it's Saudi Arabia, it's Israel, it's European Union, plus Italy, France, and Germany. So quite interesting coalition of countries. Think about one main economic corridor with 2 sub-corridors. Could have more discussions about it. But just saying this is probably not 100% a response to what China is doing, but to some extent. So in a way, and also to mention it, that this kind of let's provide a development paradigm is something for big important countries like India, but even Rwanda, and those who, if you know me, I have always an affiliation with Rwanda. Rwanda is a small, big country. They're also good in framing discussions. They have their own narrative about homegrown solutions. They create their own development paradigm, including a South-South Cooperation Agency, as a tiny, least developed country. So development paradigms are part of soft power, Coming to my last point, probably I'm overstretching already my time budget. So development paradigms from this perspective is at the center stage of international relations, at the center stage of this kind of tense situation we are facing. It's an indication that development is less collaborative than what we have seen for at least a while. Yeah? In our nice handbook on development cooperation, where Sachin Chaturvedi and others are co-editors, we are already discussing the contestation part of...
Mario is on.
Mario is on. Hi, Mario. We are missing you here. So contestation, competition is a very important part of international relations and now also part of development. And development paradigms are part of it. And this is, to my last final point, I would expect against this background that thinking about the next Agenda 2030, we might see a much more competitive situation because we have many powers from around the world who would like to shape this kind of global development paradigm. So it might be even much more complicated to the situation we have had when we were drafting the Agenda 2030. With this, back to you, Mr. Kumar. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you also for your kind words for India's ability to, put on the table some development paradigms. And I think and you have talked about many initiatives from around the world, but the very important point which you made, and I like that to be going in the report of this event, is that we should see ourselves as norm makers, not norm takers. And I think that is a very important contribution. We'll come back to that. But let me turn to, in the same spirit of the discussion, to Gerardo Bracho, who is also going to talk about, and elaborate further on this discussion on the narrative and paradigms. So Gerardo Bracho is a Mexican diplomat and currently associated with IDOS. Yes, good. So I'd like to ask you, to elaborate what type of narrative that LiFE needs to develop in order to consolidate itself as a new and credible development paradigm. So continuing from where Stefan left. Over to you, Gerardo.
Yes, well, thanks very much. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Following with what Stefan just said, I want also to talk about the issue of paradigms and what I think that LiFE has to do to consolidate itself as an alternative development paradigm. I'm not sure, on the other hand, about the concepts, because we have initiatives, paradigms, narratives. It's not all the same, no? For example, I think some of the things that China is doing is really, some of them are initiatives, they are projects, some narratives. I don't know. It is, we have to think about this. What's the difference between these concepts? Because what I was going to talk about is more in terms of paradigm as we usually think about, more in like a big umbrella of a narrative, what you would think of, I don't know, what capitalism is, or socialism, or globalization, or these big things, neoliberalism. And listening to the conversation these two last days, I was a bit struck that I didn't hear this kind of discussion. I mean, we're talking about LiFE as a development paradigm, but kind of standing alone without a conversation on what's the relation of LiFE as a paradigm, let's say, with the discussion about markets and states that we have had in during the 20th century and now, or the discussion between socialism and capitalism, or discussion between neoliberalism and welfare state capitalism, about globalization and deglobalization, where does life as a narrative comes within all these discussions that we have had. And I mean, I only heard Professor Mayra was saying yesterday, he kind of described life as a way of humanizing capitalism, he said. But I think that was the only reference I really heard, one of the only, on this type of discussions. And then I thought to myself that if life really wants to fly as a paradigm, as an alternative, as a development paradigm, it has to get into conversation with these other paradigms or ideas or narratives. And it came to my mind the example of Lord Keynes, of Keynesianism. You know, I mean, in the 1920s, Lord Keynes started writing a number of essays where he was actually confronting himself with a typical liberal paradigm where he was stated. And so he wrote these political essays. And in one of the essays, for example, he was proposing for the UK should leave the gold standard. In another essay, he was proposing for the UK to not be so liberal in terms of its free trade policy of the 19th century. Another essay, he was saying that we needed more government spending. All these things were new in the 1920s. But at some point he realized, and actually all these essays, then he put them all together in a book that's called Essays on Persuasion. He was persuading towards his policies. But this didn't really make a new paradigm, and he was profoundly aware of this. And he said to himself, well, if I really want to bring a new paradigm into the economic sphere and into the public sphere, I need to convince my colleagues. I need to do a much more grounded work in economics. And that's what he did. I mean, he came with his big general theory on employment and interest and that was the 1936 big volume on the general theory. And that made the difference. From then on, Keynesianism really became a different paradigm from liberalism, a different narrative, and Keynesianism was leading the world for 30 years, from the 40s to the 70s. So what I'm trying to say here is that the difference between having some ideas that in the 1920s, that's what he had, and really conquering the world with a new paradigm that was opposed to the liberal paradigm that he was living in, was his conversation within the economic literature and a conversation with the real paradigm that was there. And then, of course, when this paradigm changed, also there was a big discussion of ideas within, let's say, when Friedman and people like Lucas and Friedman came in, they really grounded the new paradigm of neoliberalism in this big discussion on theory and on the issue of markets and states. So this is, I think, we start, if we think of life as something different from the type of world that we have today, which is basically, I would say, a neoliberalism paradigm, we need really to start thinking on a conversation with all these big discussions of the 20th century and the 21st century. Otherwise, I don't think it will really fly on. So that was basically what I wanted to say, yeah. That we need to have a deeper conversation with these paradigms. Thanks.
Thank you, Gerardo, for emphasizing on the need of conversation. I think that is very central. All of us will agree with that. Now, let me turn to Dr. Khosla and taking this discussion forward. And just by the way, I think this audience doesn't really need an introduction for Dr. Khosla. He's chairman of Development Alternatives, and he is a pioneer of the environmental debate and discussion in the country, with many significant conceptual contributions. So, and I think his presence here, I would like to take advantage of. So if you could elaborate on 2-3 most important policy changes that are needed to enable the LiFE economy, take this agenda forward, and also the key players of government, civil society, business sector, what they can do in their individual and collective capacities to strengthen this movement towards LiFE economy. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. We've been through a long journey, and
Mike.
Is my mic on now?
Yes.
Good. We've been through a very long journey, starting several G20s back, but certainly since the Varanasi principles were announced and our meetings in Mysore and other places, it's been clear that if only people were good, life would be much better. The problem is, how do you get people to be good? And it's not an easy task, because our natural tendencies are to be driven by our own interests, which are often in conflict with those of others. The principles of neoclassical economics that Gerardo was just talking about are based really, if it's not a total misunderstanding of Adam Smith, on the idea that greed is good, that extracting from Mother Nature is a good thing to do, as much as you can, if not more. Extracting from fellow human beings, from society, is a good thing. And profit, however it's made, is a good measure of welfare in the aggregate. It often forgets the individual within that aggregate, and that's, I think, one of the big missing links that we need to deal with. And it's nothing to do with governments or policymakers in corporates. It's a way of thinking that we have adopted thanks to a series of generations, in fact, of economists whom even Mrs. Margaret Thatcher came to want to abolish as a profession. We may not want to go that extreme, but one must recognize that somebody has to take responsibility for the way we think. And it certainly wasn't the Lord Buddha or Jesus Christ or St. Francis of Assisi. They were not the ones who taught us all this. But we learned from people who really had very narrow views of things. So we need to look at how to take this process using the G20 forum forward. And I think it's very important for us to get away from the idea that the only way to fulfill one's life, to achieve satisfaction, is to be major users of material resources for whatever reason, for whatever purpose, and that we now need to figure out ways in which our well-being is determined by what we are rather than what we have, which is not an easy thing to do given the centuries of indoctrination that several generations of our forefathers have been through. But what I think we need to understand is that if you apply good rational thinking, what you might call systems thinking, these things don't make sense at all to even a little child, let alone to a grown-up. Systems thinking not only helps us figure out how to get the benefits of connecting the dots, of getting more from our resources, which could be not just physical resources, but institutional resources and all our social resources, but how we can maximize what they provide us with. There are some basic principles which have been defined and elucidated by system scientists, which we need to learn from. One is that diversity is extremely important in a system, and we need to nurture it rather than find ways to kill it. Almost all our modern civilizational mindsets and approaches are towards uniformity, towards getting a single approach to life adopted by everyone, and that's very dangerous. And systems thinking and science can give you pretty good reasons why it's not good. It leaves society and yourself vulnerable in many ways that are not wanted. If you state your overall goals for life clearly, and that, in a sense, is very important. So all of these things, like thinking that only things that can be monetized, things that require capital assets and you need to accumulate them in large quantities, all at the expense of social and value and human values that basically don't work with those. So what does LiFE, the LiFE economy, require us to do? It needs for us to look at not only what are the advantages of systems, the ways in which you can get more for less, but also how you can avoid the negatives. Dana Meadows, who's a great system scientist, used to call it the points of leverage, where you could actually figure out ways in which a given system, whether it's political or physical or economic, can give you a fundamentally different outcome if you can understand how synergies in a system work. And so you can get the benefits and you can avoid the pitfalls, the countervailing negatives. And in one sense, what we need to do is get our systems of governance, which includes the family, which includes this local society as much as the national society, the national economy, to think in those terms. And we don't have much time for me to go into more detail on that, but what I would like to draw from that is who decides what is good. So far, we've let a few people whom we elect to do that for us. In most societies, most G20 societies, there is a elected body that essentially has been given the responsibility for defining what is good for us. Now, that's not a Gandhian way. That's not the way that it has to be. Thomas Jefferson actually says a very powerful single sentence statement on this. He says, "I know of no safe repository of the ultimate powers of society than the people themselves. Even stupid, ignorant, illiterate people have a better idea about their lives than people sitting at the top of a nation. And it is they who have to be brought into the essential decision-making that runs our societies." So I think the next hour, when we'll be talking about how does this impact governments and so on, what I would like to make a case for is that you need institutions of foresight which are capable of taking the views of the people and looking at any policy, any proposed action or policy, and analyzing it for its positive and negative impacts. I think that's a very crucial, fundamental requirement that almost no country, barring about half a dozen, which I can name, has looked at as a way of defining and designing its governance and policies. So I would suggest that we look at, in the next few, how would you say, steps of the work of G20 process, at how do you bring about change, not what change needs to be brought about, because we've thrashed that out. We've talked a lot about what kinds of changes that are needed. But how do you actually make it happen? What are the institutional frameworks? And, I know of only three C's that make it possible for the changes that we're talking about to be brought about. Basically, the theory of change is not well articulated in most of our work, and we need to do that. My theory of change is you find a goal, which is a better society for all, now and forever, for the future. As long as the sun continues to shine, we get better and better at providing people with what they think is a good life. If that's acceptable, then we need to figure out how we bring that about. And it seems to me the first and most powerful way that has been done is by embedding your goals in the constitution of a society, of a nation, or of a village, or whatever. The second is to find some charismatic leader, a Gautam Buddha, or as I said, Jesus Christ, or Mahatma Gandhi, and get them to help transform people's way of thinking. They don't come more than once a millennium, so that's not something you can wait for very much, but it's a way that it works. And the third C is crises, collapse. And we're heading for collapse. In fact, we're closer to collapse as a global planetary society than we have ever been. And collapse, or avoiding collapse by having it recognized, is not a bad way either to make people focus on what needs to be done. So I think one of the things that scientists and the public needs to be able to do, and the media, is to bring about a profound change in people's understanding of what the threats are and what they mean to each one of us. I do have a fourth C, though. And I need to say that because I think it's the only one that really we have a real option for, and that is civil society. Civil society is the conscience of the world, and it has already achieved huge impacts in our way of thinking, in our morality, in what we feel is a good thing to do. And civil society needs to be nurtured much harder, much better than it has. There are forces opposing it, and there are going to be problems, but without a strong civil society, I don't see achieving any of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khosla. I think you have put on the table some very important thoughts. Importance of institutions of foresight, institutions which will bring this change, and how this is to be pushed. So the institutional framework is important, and the leaders of G20, for instance, could be deliberating on how to, what kind of institutions and what kind of institutional framework needs to be there. And then your, emphasis on including these goals in the Constitution could be helpful. Using a charismatic figure to, sort of link the new ideals of life could be helpful. And civil society is clearly very important institutional actor to, work on the life economy and take it forward. So from that discussion, let me turn to my colleague from the private sector, Mr. Pranav Kumar, who is Vice President for International Trade Policy and Compliance with Reliance Industries Limited. Reliance Industries, for friends from outside, is the largest corporation, if I'm correct, yes, largest private company in the country, and one of the largest in anywhere in the world. And it is into all different sectors like a conglomerate. So I think Dr. Khosla was talking about different actors and civil society, he mentioned in particular, but business sector, is also an important actor in the in any society and economy. So how do you see businesses helping to promote sustainable production and consumption, including through sustainable value chains, through technology transitions, innovations, and investments in key areas? So, and how can business and government work together to promote circular economy and sustainable development? So over to you, Pranav. But we are running short of time, so I would request.
I'm aware about that.
Good.
So thank you very much,
you.
Dr. Kumar, for this very generous introduction. In fact, while we are discussing this important topic today, and this month has been quite eventful because only last week we concluded the INC 3 on the plastic negotiation and the UNEP. Just 2 days from now, the entire world would be descending in UAE for the COP28. Of course, this month also we concluded our negotiation on Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and there also we have 2 very important pillars. One is the supply chain, where we are talking about sustainability and all, and also the the clean economy pillar, where a lot of issues like energy transition and all we are discussing. And so having said that, and this concept of life, the lifestyle for environment, when we are talking about lifestyle, of course, that cannot be changed drastically overnight. It will take time because it's a lifestyle. But this is a very powerful concept, of course, given by our Honorable Prime Minister 2 years back. And of course, we use the G20 presidency very effectively in terms of reaching out to the larger number of stakeholders. And that is the key here, because when we talk about these very complex topic and subjects, and I represent industry, I would say the producer, and producer mean not only industry, but the farmers and of course those who are into the service sector. So for them, information is very important, their sensitization is very important, and you mentioned about how we can create an ecosystem where the producers, consumers, and government can work together. So here I would like to mention the 2 very important examples here, and how the government and private sectors, they have worked together in making that very impactful change. One is in case of India, of course I'm giving the example of India, the LED bulb in case of India, because the government came out this scheme 10 years back. It was very expensive, not affordable, but of course with government support and incentives, subsidies and all, today the LED penetration in India is 88%. So that is massive. And of course every household is using the LED bulb. and that has impacted in terms of in energy efficiency and power consumption. Second is the use of solar power. And again, over last 9 years or 10 years, we have seen that the capacity in India, it has increased almost by 30 times. Today, the solar power generation capacity in India is close to 70 gigawatt. And this has all happened because the government support. It is also under the production linked incentive schemes. Many small players are coming and producing the solar panel and wafer and all, the photovoltaic cell. So these are some of the small, but of course, very significant examples where the government and private sector, they have worked together and of course brought the significant, very visible change in terms of the LiFE economy. Now coming back to what as a businesses we are doing, of course, you mentioned about that there are some downside of it also. For instance, the ban on single-use plastic, which has not been as successful. We have tried for many years. But of course, so far, we have not been able to implement it very successfully, very effectively. But of course, we are moving in and you also mentioned about the circular economy. This is very important as a group because we are at the top of the plastic value chain. We are into hydrocarbons. And of course, that is one of the major sectors when we talk about emission or energy transition and all. And second, of course, the steel sector, of course. And both sectors are being discussed quite extensively during our G20 presidency also. So as a group, we are committed for circular economy, and particularly, for instance, if you take the PET bottle, of course, today we are using this glass bottle, but 90% of India's PET bottle that is being recycled, and we are the leader in that. And not only we are converting into yarn and fabric, but also we are trying to collaborate with the big fashion brands. So when we talk about circular economy, because we are trying to reuse the products. So for that, what we need that we have to create a market for those products. And that is the challenge we have. Because if we are converting the PET bottle plastic into fabric, then of course we need demand for that. And that is what we are, again, the government is trying to create those kind of demand, how we can popularize that and all. So these are some of the important steps which as a group we are taking. And my last point would be on the energy sector particularly. Again, when we talk about energy transition, of course we have been discussing. But if you see that our chairman mentioned about how we can make it more affordable and sustainable. And when we talk about India, it has to be affordable because it has to be for mass consumption. So, and that is what our mission, because we are focused on 4 main pillars. One is the solar, second is the wind, hydrogen storage and of course transportation, and fourth of course is the batteries for electrical vehicles. So these are big investments from our group, and we are trying to make it happen, LiFE economy. So, but of course, we have a long journey to cover. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pranav, for bringing to the table how when government and businesses work together, change can be brought about. And very concrete examples, adoption of LEDs and solar power in India, have shown really that it works when both government and private sector work together. And this is similar thing is needed, that similar approach is needed to carry us through, and including on speeding up this circular economy, creating the demand for recycled products. So that's a very important input. Let me now turn to, I hope our friend Mario Pecini, now you have had your coffee. He's joining from Paris, and so I told him that I will reach you a bit later in the day so that you have had a chance to grab your coffee because it's very early in the morning in Paris. And so thank you very much for joining from Paris, and of course we would have liked you to be here physically, but I know the circumstances which did not allow you to be here. So Mario, by the way, everyone knows him as a former director of the OECD Development Center, and a very eminent and distinguished development economist. So I don't think he needs any introduction. So I wanted you to touch upon, because you have been writing for many years on the international cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation. So what modes of collaboration and coordination are required amongst the governments and stakeholders at national, local, national, and international or global levels? So over to you, Mario. I think you are muted.
Now I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you
Okay.
loud and clear.
Very well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be all together, even if not physically, at least by air. And thank you for the debate. And I would like to contribute on 3 points. I would also like very much to listen to my friends Paolo, that I think will touch upon similar matters. My first point has to do with the present situation and where we stand with creating paradigms to understand and act. I have the feeling that we are in a kind of organic crisis. Actually, I'm not the only one. By the things you were so kind to mention, let me just add the fact that I am editor of the Development Cooperation Review, which is a review of the RIS. And in the number we produce for the G20, there is a very interesting contribution from Jose Antonio Sanauca that I would suggest to read for what concerns the present state of our activities and thinking. And this stress, as I do, the fact that we are in a kind of organic crisis because we have been through a paradigm. But this paradigm, neoliberal, neoclassical, is over, but still resisting. And in reality, we don't have now a new one. And the paradigm shift happens when you have a new vision that actually makes you realize that the old one doesn't work anymore. This was the case with John Maynard Keynes, or in the same years with Piero Sraffa, that obviously criticized the marginalism and so on. But we are not there. We are in a kind of between two kingdoms, in the mainstream, when we realize that something is not working, but exactly where to go is not yet at our reach. In this situation, we are in danger because in a certain sense, monster can appear. Our tools to understand are not helpful to help to make the action take place. So in this general situation, what can we do? The urgency is strong because we perceive a general discontent in developed as well as in developing countries, where people, unsatisfied with the explanation at hand, try to figure out alternative solutions that don't necessarily work, and in any case, ask to have more voice. Therefore, the fact that we are now working around this concept of LiFE is obviously timely and make a lot of sense that we try to take it seriously and develop a thinking around it. This was my first point, so I cannot but share the purpose of this meeting. My second point is that if we want to build something, we have to revise many of our thinking in the past. All the paradigms that have been built around Taylorism or around the functioning of the economy were based on the idea that the world is more or less understandable, the information that we need is given, and is transparent. And therefore, a kind of God or gods that look from the sky on the earth can decide what is needed and what should be done. And very often the economists like to put themselves in that position in Google, up in the sky. This type of certainty is not at hand anymore. In part because our paradigm is not done, but in part also because there are many actors, objectives, and modalities that are changing. You all mentioned the fact that now we have new actors on the scene, a very important and powerful one. We call them the emerging country. I am not sure that we can still continue to call them the emerging countries. These are countries with a strong agency. And I would add to the traditional one, also Africa, which is more and more organized through the African Union, in political action that were unthinkable before. But we have also new objectives. In fact, the traditional growth objectives on which all economics was based are not working anymore. Because first of all, there is a big distributional issues where the wealth goes. It goes to certain countries, not to others. It goes to certain people within a country and not to others. And the inequalities have so strongly increased. So we are in an uncertain world. And the problem of our paradigm is how do we build a thinking knowing that we cannot predict? That is not true that we can assume that demand is infinite and therefore we can exploit economy of scales. It's like a firm that every day has to reinvent the product and the customers. And that's exactly what has been happening in the private sector in the last 40 years. But we pretend that in the public domain, this is not the case, that everything can be predicted. And we fail. Therefore, I don't think that planning in the sense in which we thought in the 60s is the tool we have to envisage. Whilst on the other hand, I do recognize that there is a very strong demand of a population that has increased and has changed in terms of knowledge, and the demand of the population is to count and to have a voice. So, my first point was we are in an organic crisis. My second point is we are in uncertainty, and how do we build a mechanism of functioning that has uncertainty as a strong component and a strong element of landscape? And here I come to my third point. And I have to say that the discussion up to now seems to me that has highlighted a series of contradictions. Many have said that we need to consider a new planning, maybe a negotiated planning where different actors should have a voice and to discuss among each other. But on the other hand, we say that we need a Christ and a leader, and personally I have to confess that I think that the call for a leader and the call for civil society are sometimes in contradiction. And for sure, what do we put in the civil society? The G20? Sorry, but there is something that doesn't work in our way of thinking. Do we put in civil society big corporate? I'm sorry, but the mechanism of power of our society tends to put big corporate on the top of the sky, not on the earth. And therefore, if we need a mechanism of participation and planning, we need to answer to those people that in the street of Chile have asked for a new constitution, those people that in the street of Rio de Janeiro have asked for a change in government, those people that in Senegal almost made the country explode, or in Thailand, and not to mention France with the Gilets jaunes and all the phenomena very producing anxiety that we observed in the last election in many Western countries. So in this case, the point is, how do we invent a mechanism that is capable to deal with uncertainty, to give voice to people, and try to identify new value, new objectives, and new modalities? I think that if we go in that direction, we can't but consider a kind of experimentalism. If we don't have certainty, if the so-called law of nature in reality are difficult to be understood, and even more the law of society, then we can't but do experiments and put in place a mechanism of learning by which through experiments we try to see and figure out what does work, what does not, and if it does, to generalize it. I have the feeling that if we want to go down that road, we need to reinvent multilateralism. We cannot have a situation in which we discuss of development only between developed countries' donors, without any southern country. We cannot have places where we discuss about security where there is no southern country represented. We cannot have a situation in which we pretend that we know already what is happening in developing countries by means of our embassy of northern countries. There is obviously something that needs to be revised. And my suggestion, therefore, is that in this needed change of paradigm, what we need to consider is that the situation is pretty serious, that uncertainty is the everyday condition, and that the mechanism of participation are more and more indispensable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario, for emphasizing the need for reinventing multilateralism, which is fit for purpose for this current age, and the existing structure, multilateral structure, obviously is very, severely outdated, and we need to pull all the sort of forces and powers and leverage them to reinvent that and make it fit for purpose.